There is a very specific moment when a woman realizes her life has been rewritten without her permission. It doesn't arrive with shouting or tears. It arrives quietly, usually when no one else is watching. For me, that moment came on an ordinary afternoon, standing in my own kitchen, holding a mug of coffee that had already gone cold, listening to my husband explain where he had been, with a voice so practiced, so smooth, that I understood the truth before I ever found proof. In that moment, I didn't feel anger. I felt something far more dangerous: clarity. The kind that tells you the story you've been living is no longer real, and that everything you've trusted is about to collapse under its own weight. My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 62 years old, and I live in a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio, in a house people describe as peaceful when they drive by. I was married for 40 years to a man everyone respected. Church friends, neighbors, even our own children believed he was steady, loyal, dependable. And for most of my life, I believed that too. I built my days around responsibility, routine, and patience. I believed stability was strength. Before I go any further, let me ask you something. Where are you listening to this from? Your city, your state? Leave it in the comments, because what happened to me doesn't belong to one place or one woman. It happens quietly behind closed doors in homes that look perfectly fine from the outside. I didn't suspect betrayal because I was weak or careless. I didn't suspect it because I was busy holding everything together. Bills paid, holidays hosted, crises managed. Over time, I became the foundation while my husband became very good at building shadows. Business trips that didn't need details, late nights that came with rehearsed apologies, absences disguised as responsibility. At my age, people assume you'd notice if something was wrong. They assume you're past the stage of being deceived. And that assumption is exactly what allowed him to believe I would never question him, never look deeper, never prepare. But what he misunderstood, what everyone misunderstood, was that silence does not mean blindness, and patience does not mean weakness. It only means I was watching longer than anyone realized. Looking back now, I can trace the beginning of the lie long before I ever admitted it to myself. Not to a single event, but to a gradual shift in the atmosphere of our life together. The way a room feels colder before you realize a window has been left open. My husband didn't change overnight. That's what makes long-term betrayal so effective. It evolves quietly. He became more efficient with his affection, more selective with his presence. Conversations shortened. Eye contact faded. He started living in schedules instead of moments. At first, I told myself this was what aging marriages looked like: less romance, more logistics. After 40 years together, passion wasn't something you demanded. It was something you remembered fondly and then let rest. I adjusted, the way women of my generation were taught to do. I stopped asking unnecessary questions. I learned which topics made him tense and which ones kept the peace. And slowly, without ever announcing it, I became the background of his life instead of the center. There were signs, of course. There are always signs. Receipts that didn't match explanations. Credit card statements that required extra justifications. Weekends he claimed to spend with colleagues whose names never repeated. But when you've invested decades into a life, you don't rush to suspicion. You protect the structure first. You convince yourself that doubt is disloyal, that questioning is ingratitude. I told myself I was being mature, trusting, evolved. What I was really doing was allowing him to control the narrative. And he did it so gently that even now I almost admire the precision. He never raised his voice, never forgot important dates, never acted careless. He knew exactly how much truth to give me to keep me calm. What he didn't know, what he never accounted for, was that I had spent my entire life observing human behavior. Raising children teaches you that. Managing a household teaches you that. You learn that people reveal themselves most clearly when they believe they are unobserved. And the more he disappeared into explanations that sounded reasonable, the more my attention sharpened. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't even suspicious in the way people imagine. I was simply alert. And once a woman becomes alert, the story is already shifting, whether the people around her realize it or not. The moment I finally crossed from awareness into certainty didn't happen in a dramatic way either. It wasn't a confrontation or a discovery pulled from thin air. It was something smaller, almost embarrassing in its simplicity. One evening, while folding laundry in the quiet rhythm I had perfected over decades, I realized I could no longer remember the last time my husband had asked me a question that wasn't functional. Not did you eat, or did you pay the bill, but a real question. One that suggested curiosity about who I was, what I thought, how I felt. That absence settled heavily in my chest, and instead of pushing it away like I usually did, I let it sit there. I started paying attention with intention. I noticed how his phone never left his side anymore, how it was always face down, always on silent. I noticed how his moods didn't align with our home life, how he could come back from a so-called exhausting trip, strangely energized, humming to himself as if returning from somewhere warm and welcoming. I noticed how he had begun speaking about the future without including me in it, using phrases like "when things slow down" or "eventually," without ever saying "with you." I didn't follow him. I didn't check his messages. I didn't search drawers or demand explanations. That's not how women like me operate, not because we can't, but because we understand timing. Instead, I started preparing quietly. I reviewed our finances the way I always had, but with sharper eyes. I memorized patterns. I reread documents I'd signed years ago without much thought. I listened more than I spoke. And what I learned during that time was more painful than any single revelation could have been. My husband had stopped seeing me as a partner long before he stopped sharing a bed with me. I had become infrastructure. Useful, reliable, invisible. The realization didn't break me, it focused me. Because once you understand that someone has reduced you to a convenience, you also understand that they have underestimated you. And underestimation is the greatest advantage a woman like me can ever have. The proof arrived when I was no longer looking for it, which is often how the most important truths surface. It came through something as mundane as a calendar entry, one I stumbled upon while syncing our shared tablet. The one he rarely used and had clearly forgotten still linked to his accounts. At first, it looked harmless. A recurring reminder set twice a month, always midweek, always labeled with a single initial. No explanation, no context, just consistency. 40 years of marriage teaches you patterns, and this one didn't belong to us. I didn't react right away. I sat there, the glow of the screen reflecting back at me, and felt a strange calm settle in. Not denial, acceptance. I followed the trail slowly, methodically, the way you would approach something fragile that might shatter if handled too roughly. Travel receipts matched the dates. A storage unit I didn't recognize appeared on a statement. Then a second address, close enough to feel deliberate, far enough to stay hidden. When I finally uncovered the truth, it didn't explode into my life. It unfolded. A second household. A woman who believed she was loved. Plans made without me. A parallel life constructed with care and patience, financed partly with money I had helped earn and manage. What surprised me most wasn't the betrayal itself. It was how little space there was for shock. Somewhere deep inside, I had already grieved the marriage I thought I had. What hurt was realizing how carefully he had measured me, how confidently he believed I would never push beyond my role. He thought I was too tired, too loyal, too conditioned to sacrifice to ever disrupt the balance he had created. And perhaps years ago, that would have been true. But age does something unexpected to women like me. It strips away the need to please. It replaces fear with clarity. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry into a friend's shoulder. I didn't even tell my children. I closed the tablet, finished syncing the calendar, and went back to making dinner. Because once you see the full shape of the lie, you don't rush toward emotion, you move toward strategy. From that point on, I began living two lives of my own. One visible, familiar, and calm, and the other completely private, deliberate and awake. On the surface, nothing changed. I still cooked dinner, still asked about his day, still attended family gatherings where he played the role of devoted husband with impressive consistency. If anything, he seemed more relaxed, as if convinced the distance between us had become permanent and harmless. But inside, everything shifted. I started reclaiming pieces of myself I had set aside for years. I updated passwords. I separated accounts quietly under the guise of organizing paperwork for retirement. I consulted professionals without raising suspicion, asking careful questions framed as hypotheticals. I listened. I learned. And the more I learned, the clearer it became that this wasn't just betrayal of the heart, it was a calculated gamble. He had assumed that even if the truth surfaced, I would choose peace over justice, silence over disruption. He was wrong. What people misunderstand about women my age is that we don't seek revenge out of rage. We seek it out of balance. I didn't want to hurt him. I wanted the truth to stand where the lie had been. I wanted the consequences to match the deception. Late at night, when the house was quiet and he slept easily beside me, I would lie awake thinking not about what I'd lost, but about what I still had: my intelligence, my composure, my time. I realized something then that felt almost liberating. The life he had been protecting so carefully wasn't stronger than me. It was dependent on my silence. And silence, once chosen deliberately, can be just as powerful as any confrontation. By the time I was ready to move, I wasn't acting out of pain anymore. I was acting out of certainty. The day I decided to stop pretending came without ceremony. No dramatic trigger, no final straw, just a quiet morning when I woke up and realized I was no longer willing to protect a man who had never once protected my dignity. I watched him leave for what he called a short trip, suitcase in hand, kiss placed gently on my forehead like a habit he no longer questioned. The door closed behind him, and for the first time in decades, I felt alone in a way that was clean, not abandoned, not afraid, just unburdened. That morning, I sat at the dining table with a legal pad and wrote everything down. Dates, patterns, names, accounts. I didn't rush. I didn't panic. I treated the truth like an inventory because that's what it was, an accounting of what had been taken and what could still be reclaimed. I contacted a lawyer recommended quietly through a professional circle, someone who understood discretion and timing. I didn't ask for sympathy. I asked for options. And when he explained them, slowly, carefully, I listened with the kind of focus that only comes when emotion has already burned itself out. What followed was not chaos, but control. Documents were prepared. Protections were put in place. Decisions were made long before words were spoken. By the time my husband returned home, unaware and confident, the ground beneath him had already shifted. I continued playing my role flawlessly, not out of weakness, but because timing matters. People expect confrontation to look like anger. They don't expect patience sharpened into resolve. And that misunderstanding gave me space to plan, space to choose my ending rather than react to his. When I finally looked at him across the dinner table that evening, I didn't see my husband anymore. I saw a man who had mistaken loyalty for ignorance and who was about to learn the difference. I chose the moment carefully, not because I feared him, but because I respected myself enough to let the truth arrive with weight instead of noise. It happened on a Sunday evening, the kind people associate with rest and reflection. Dinner was already cleared. The house was quiet. No distractions. No excuses. I sat across from him at the same table where we had celebrated anniversaries, planned futures, and raised children who believed their parents' marriage was unbreakable. I didn't accuse him. I didn't raise my voice. I simply placed a folder between us, neat, labeled, complete. His face changed before he even opened it. People always know when the lie has reached its end. He tried first to minimize, then to explain, then to redirect blame toward time, loneliness, misunderstanding. I let him speak because I wanted to hear how far he would go once cornered by facts. When he finished, I told him calmly that I already knew everything. About the second home, the woman who believed she was his only wife, the years of careful deception. I told him I had known longer than he imagined. The silence that followed wasn't tense. It was empty. That was the moment he understood he had miscalculated. Not because I was leaving, but because I had already left emotionally long before he was ready to face the consequences. What followed wasn't the collapse he expected. There were no tears, no begging. No dramatic exits in the middle of the night. That's what men like him prepare for, the emotional storm they believe they can either outlast or manipulate. Instead, he faced something far more unsettling: my detachment. I explained calmly and clearly what would happen next: the legal separation, the financial division already in motion, the fact that the accounts he relied on had protections he could no longer bypass. Each sentence landed quietly, but I could see the panic spreading behind his eyes. He asked how long I'd known. I told him the truth, that the moment I stopped trusting his words was the moment I started trusting myself. He tried to bargain then, speaking about history, about sacrifices, about how much we'd built together. I reminded him that shared history doesn't excuse shared deceit, and that the life he built in secret came with consequences he would now carry alone. In the days that followed, the mask finally slipped. Anger replaced charm. Accusations replaced apologies. He told me I was cruel, calculated, cold. I listened without reacting because those words were simply evidence of how deeply he had misunderstood me. He believed strength had to be loud to be real. He believed revenge looked like destruction. What he couldn't grasp was that my power came from restraint, from choosing not to burn everything down just to prove I could. While he unraveled, I stabilized. While he scrambled to explain himself to children and friends, I focused on my future, my home, my finances, my peace. The quiet confidence that unsettled him wasn't something I learned overnight. It was something I had earned by surviving decades of being underestimated. As the weeks passed, the world began to realign itself in ways I hadn't anticipated. People reacted exactly as I'd expected them to, some with disbelief, some with judgment, and some with a silence that spoke louder than words. A few asked why I hadn't noticed sooner, why I had stayed, why I hadn't fought harder. None of them asked how he had managed to lie so convincingly for so long. That question rarely gets asked of men like him. I learned quickly who valued truth and who preferred comfort. I learned which relationships were built on genuine respect and which ones existed only because I had been convenient. And surprisingly, I felt lighter with every loss. Without the burden of maintaining appearances, I had room to breathe, to think, to remember who I had been before my life became a series of obligations. I redecorated small things first. A chair moved, a photo removed, a room reclaimed. Each change was subtle, but together they marked the beginning of a life no longer arranged around someone else's deception. He tried one final time to regain control, not through apologies but through pressure. He warned me about loneliness, about regret, about how difficult it would be to start over at my age. I listened, and then I laughed softly, not out of spite but clarity. Loneliness, I realized, isn't the absence of a person. It's the absence of honesty. And I had been lonely long before he ever left. The difference now was that the loneliness no longer belonged to me alone. It belonged to him. I was moving forward with intention, with resources secured, with boundaries enforced. The life he thought he could manage from behind the scenes was no longer mine to maintain. And for the first time in years, I felt something close to freedom, not the reckless kind, but the quiet, steady kind that grows when you finally choose yourself. The end of my marriage did not feel like an ending at all. It felt like a return. A return to myself, to the woman I had slowly set aside while carrying everyone else's weight. I didn't celebrate. I didn't announce my victory. I simply lived differently. I woke up without tension in my chest. I made plans without explaining them to anyone. I spoke honestly, even when my voice was calm. And in that calm, I found something stronger than anger: dignity. He faded from my daily life the way a bad habit does once you stop feeding it. The woman he had hidden did not contact me, and I didn't seek her out. She was another casualty of his choices, not my enemy. My revenge was never about humiliation or destruction. It was about refusing to be erased, about standing fully in my truth without apology. If you're listening to this and something in it feels familiar, if you've ever sensed a lie before you could prove it, if you've ever stayed quiet because peace felt easier than confrontation, understand this: awareness is power. You are not too old. You are not foolish for trusting. And you are never wrong for choosing yourself when the truth finally arrives. If this story resonated with you, let me know where you're listening from and share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to hear more stories like this, Stories about quiet strength, patience, and justice that doesn't shout. Consider subscribing. Above all, remember this one truth I learned the hard way. Don't underestimate the power of women. And Merry Christmas.